Hello, and welcome to our podcast dedicated to everyone involved in education. I'm your host, Ant, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Emma and Nick.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. We've got an important topic lined up, well-being and resilience in education, something that we all need to focus on, especially in such high demand professions.
Absolutely, Emma, and it's great to be here talking about this. Well-being isn't just about physical health, it's about mental and emotional health too. And it's something that we as educators and caregivers have to be mindful of, both for ourselves and for the children that we support.
Yeah, right. Today, we're speaking with Sarah Patterson, a qualified counsellor and head of counselling at Uproar, that's UPRAWR, a mental health charity. She's going to give us some insights into building resilience, managing stress, and how we can create a healthier work-life balance in education. So let's jump right into the conversation now with Sarah.
Hello and welcome to our podcast today based on resilience. I'm here with the lovely Sarah Patterson. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Sarah Patterson. I'm a qualified counsellor and I'm the head of counselling for a charity called Uproar, and that's spelled UPRAWR. And they're a mental health foundation that offers free counselling to people between the ages of 18 and 35.
Oh, fantastic. And how long have you been doing counselling for, Sarah? It's been a real interest of yours, hasn't it?
It has. So I had a charity background and in a very corporate role. And I just started to develop an interest in well-being. And as we'll get on to, well-being is like such a huge theme in the workplace. And I dipped my toe into a taster course and found myself kind of 4 years later um, going all of the way and completing the training. And that was, I think I've been qualified for about 18 months now.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. That's so lovely. And thank you for being with us today. So, yes, I know you're really passionate about sort of the well-being. And just wanted, first of all, what do you feel about resilience from that counselling perspective? Why do you think it's so important in an education, nursery setting, and for the staff that work with the children? Why do you think it's so important?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, resilience is our ability to bounce back after a difficult situation. So, I think in the education setting, when you are in a highly stressful environment, it's unpredictable. There are lots of variables with the children, with the parents, with the work commitment, particularly those who are studying as well alongside. There's a lot of pressure going on. So we really do need to tap into resilience to be able to, get through the working week, but also look after ourselves at the same time.
Thank you, Sarah. And, are there any differences in how sort of resilience manifests in children and adults? Is it something that we get from when we're little? Is it and we kind of grow with it? Or is it something that we can learn at any time? How can we develop that resilience? Is it from sort of any age? How can we make that happen and develop that practice?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a combination. So there's an inherent type of resilience that we will all have been um, born with, and that as long as we don't have early trauma in our lives, that will remain intact. But obviously, some children from a very young age have difficult experiences and experience trauma, which will start to sort of chip away at that resilience that we were born with. And then as we get older, we can learn resilience too. So that will be from our caregivers, our parents, teachers. Um, um, if we're fortunate as children, we will be around adults who model self-care, resilience, stress management, and we will feel as we get older, we can adapt to stressful situations around us.
Thank you. So that's really, really interesting. So thinking about how that resilience starts off in children, and obviously you said about having those positive role models around children. What kind of things do you think we could be doing with children, particularly in settings that would help build that resilience for them? Is there anything that you think this would work for a child, that you're really trying to build that self-confidence, that self-esteem, and try and help direct them into that, good pathway of having that resilience from a young age? Is there anything that we can do particularly to help them?
I think that first of all, modeling resilience within ourselves. So as an adult, showing that things go wrong for us too, and we can overcome that all the time, and we overcome it. We can laugh at ourselves. We can normalize these feelings of dealing with problems or things going wrong, even hurting ourselves, falling over, all of those, embarrassment, that whole spectrum of emotions we can model to children, and normalize them. And I also feel that for children, it's really important to validate what's happening for them. And, I'm not an expert with, supporting children, but I do know that every child is completely different. And some children will be able to dust themselves off, and pick themselves up after something going wrong. And another child won't be able to. They won't be able to tap into that. And both are right. There is no right or wrong response to something going wrong for a child. And I think to normalise each child's individuality is really important, and that it's important also for them to understand they're not striving for perfection. And it's okay to have a voice and to say how you feel. And I think it'd be really important for any adult really to validate each child's emotions.
Absolutely, absolutely. We do a lot in early years of supporting that self-regulation. So helping the children to kind of develop their knowledge of the emotions that they're feeling. Because even I have to be honest, Sarah, even as an adult, sometimes I don't feel very resilient. I needed to pop to Tesco's, for example, the other day and get some toilet roll. And I went into Tesco's and they'd completely changed the layout. And everything in me wanted to lay on the floor like a 2-year-old and kick and scream, because I had 5 minutes to get in and get out. And I had found myself deep breathing, trying to find somebody to tell me where the toilet roll was. So, and sometimes I was like, well, was I angry? Was I frustrated? Like, what was I feeling that I wanted to chuck myself on the floor like a 2-year-old? So I think absolutely supporting children with those really big emotions, and, making sure that they've got a way of letting out their feelings, letting out that feeling that they've got in their body. Just going to talk to you a bit about physical health. How do you feel that kind of that physical health supports building and maintaining that resilience?
Yeah, it's huge, actually. And I think one of my counselling tutors had a really good analogy of thinking of that physical self-care as almost like as if you were building a house, and the foundation of that house is, your sleep, your healthy routines, the self-care, the eating, all of those factors are really important in building a solid foundation. If you don't have those basics, you're effectively building a house on sand. It's really important to invest in a strong foundation. And, those people who can operate on zero sleep, are probably quite unusual. So, sleep is super important. Eating, exercise, work-life balance, these are the kind of physical conditions that are needed to have a strong foundation, and they would really give us a much stronger chance of being able to deal with other stressful factors in our life.
I think that's really interesting, because I know when I used to work, particularly in directly in the sector, there was times where my lunch break, I probably didn't always eat because I was doing other things. I was juggling other things. And I suppose because I wasn't sort of nourishing my body for the rest of the afternoon, I'd find that I would have that fatigue draining feeling, which probably meant that I wasn't at my best because I wasn't taking care of myself to then ensure that I could take care of other people effectively.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting that you've said that. And I think, how would you encourage, you know, professionals, like educators and nursery staff who, you know, potentially are working really long hours, have their own families, are also studying? Is there any sort of things that you think that could help build that resilience, could build that well-being? Obviously, starting off with those foundations, being aware of what's good for them. What kind of things could we do?
Well, I first of all think self-awareness is the first step, because we'll all have different triggers to stress, different levels of resilience. So I think really understanding who you are and how you respond to stress is really important. Because, you know, once you've tapped into a stress trigger, you can start to understand what you could put in place to minimize it. And it could be, for example, speaking to somebody. So I'm a counsellor, but that might not always be required. It could be a colleague, a friend, a family member, who understands you, because it's really important to process what's going on for you, and that often is by speaking to somebody. I would say that once you understand your triggers and your options, understanding what's in your control and what isn't is also really important.
That's
You know, in that,
really,
yeah,
what is in your control and what isn't. That's an interesting perspective.
yeah. I mean, there'll be a load of things, you know, in your setting that you're not in control of. I mean, children are unpredictable, right? You know, and there'll be a big part of your job that is kind of set in stone for you, things that you must do, come what may. But understanding the things that are controllable, such as, first of all, how we respond to things. But there could also be lots of practical things in our roles, such as taking a break, um, putting things in place to say, do you know what? I've realised that on a Friday, I'm starting to feel burnt out. So what activities could we do on a Friday that can kind of minimise the level of stress and the tidying up or the admin that's kind of needed to, you know, at the end of the week. So, you know, it might be something in your routine that you can start to put in place to sort of help you through difficult parts of the week. Um, but yeah, back to the kind of physical self-care stuff, I think it's really, really important to prioritize that work-life balance and think about, you know, what amount of time do I have to play with in my working week, and how am I going to prioritize what's important to me? And that could be family time, that could be social time, exercise, you know, finding out you know, what good looks like for you and how you can prioritize that in your working week.
I find that really interesting to think about, looking and reflecting on yourself. We do a lot of reflection as we're training and within our work life to improve ourselves and our quality of work, but actually we need to develop that investment in ourselves. I think that's really interesting. I find one of the things that I find really helpful, Sarah, is if I'm stressed, I know I need a cup of tea. And that's the one thing that I've always sort of tapped in on myself. If I'm really stressed, I know that if I make myself a cup of tea and just sit down for a minute and give myself a couple of minutes and have a cup of tea, then I'm often ready to go back to it. And that's one thing
Yes.
that I realise really works for me. Obviously, it's not a big, long break, it's 5 minutes, but I know that that
Yeah.
can really sort of ground me again, make me,
Yeah.
that time is enough for me to think probably in a more, I don't know, balanced way rather than being really
Yeah.
reactive, because I can be really reactive. And I think that's so, but that is really, really interesting. And, you know, finding someone you can trust, that you can talk to, that might have ideas of how to support you, is excellent. I think that's a great way. And preventing that burnout. And I always thought of burnout as something that happens over a prolonged period of time, but you're absolutely right. So many people by Friday, they've worked so hard all week, they've put that real energy. It's not that it happens after a period of time, it can actually happen, I suppose, thinking about it more regularly than you're aware of. But the thought of maybe changing it up a little bit and maybe having a more relaxed approach on a Friday, you know, even the children might be feeling that from Monday to Friday, their little minds are go, 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 go. And they might appreciate looking at routine and being adaptable and things like that for them. That's really, it's a really interesting thing you've mentioned there. And I think it's, you know, and I think even for children, it's important to think about how they could maybe regulate themselves. What do they enjoy doing? Do they enjoy painting? Do they enjoy being outside and running around? What do they need? What is going to help them release whatever emotional energy is kind of built up inside them? Is going to be really helpful. That really was a really good point. Really good point. Sarah, we all have moments because life isn't always easy, and I suppose, you know, sometimes you have things in life that happen, and it's a real struggle to get up every day. It's really hard. And what advice as a counsellor would you give to somebody who maybe is struggling with real high stress, and maybe, you know, borderlining on having those mental health concerns, such as things like anxiety and depression? And I know people can go through stages of that in life due to things environmentally that are going on around them. What would you say as a counsellor to these people to help them?
I mean, I think we really normalize these conditions, but, you know, stress, anxiety, depression, you know, they are serious conditions. And although we say it in kind of throwaway kind of comments like, oh, I'm so stressed at the moment, or I've got major anxiety about this, actually, when it's for a prolonged period of time, it can have a really serious impact on our mental health. So I would definitely advocate speaking to your GP in the first instance. And, you know, I think that there are so many different options for people. People might have a barrier about taking that first step because they think, oh, it's not so serious, and oh, I don't want to be on any medication, or, you know, but recognizing the signs and taking action at the beginning can have a huge impact in feeling like you're taking control of a situation. And it might be that you have a great conversation with a GP who talks you through some options of things that might be available to you. And sometimes when we say things out loud for the first time, it's the first time we're really making sense of it in our heads. We're having it validated by somebody else, and feeling that we have options in front of us in itself can have a really positive impact in where we're at in our heads. And you might not feel that you need to take any of those options, but to know that they're on the table and what you need to do to access them is just such a great feeling when you're feeling overwhelmed. Those options can lead into a number of different avenues. And for some people, it could be taking some time out. It could be accessing some mental health support, such as counselling, or it could be medication. I'm an advocate of all of those things. And sometimes people need a combination of all of them if things have got to a certain stage. Sometimes it's just trying one of them. And it's no one size fits all with our mental health. So it can be about trying a few combinations of things to sort of see how you go. So definitely accessing that GP service to get that formal kind of advice is definitely a great first step.
Thank you, Sarah. That's excellent. Excellent. So it just goes to show that I think, you know, sometimes I suppose being resilient ourselves, we do in a way, we don't even realize it because we do that. We've got to carry on, we've got to keep going, but actually taking a step back and going, what do I need to know that those options are available are really beneficial. And I think now more than ever, we're finally understanding how important mental health and well-being is, because in most workplaces now there's a mental health first aider. There is just so much, and I think we've got to not look at the stigma against it, because I still feel there's a bit of a stigma against mental health.
I think there is, and I think that it can be really hard to dig deep when we're going through really difficult times. And I've been through very difficult times, particularly studying, because it's such a pressured situation where you've got an essay deadline, an exam looming. If you're doing that while juggling, working, learning, maybe even family commitments as well. It's a hugely testing time, right? But I remember as a counsellor, you have to have counselling yourself. And I remember thinking, well, I don't need this. I'm training to be a counsellor. I can handle this. And I went from feeling like that to feeling that actually this is a really amazing part of my routine now, that each week, instead of just ticking a box for those sessions, I was really looking forward to counselling, because it was the first time that in a week I would ground myself. So you mentioned earlier about having a cup of tea, and you might be able to grab moments throughout your day, but actually to have 1 hour in a week where you put a foot on the floor and just get off the roller coaster for a moment and just think about, who am I, where am I, but what do I need, and actually in a counselling session, that was the first time I was really tapping into that. So yeah, that became an important part of my week, and I would leave my counselling session feeling lighter and clearer, and ready to kind of approach the rest of the week.
It's really interesting. So you found that really beneficial.
Yeah,
I suppose it's
definitely.
knowing yourself, isn't it? It's knowing
Yes.
knowing what you need, which is so important, because I think even as adults we don't always know, because we just keep going. We're almost like a hamster on a wheel that keeps going round and round and round, and it's taking that break to step off and ground yourself. That's really interesting. And I think particularly with children, when we work with them now, we are providing an environment. Sometimes there's lots of settings now that provide environments which are really calming for children, so they have got a place that they can go to relax. And I think it's nothing but beneficial then that there is this big focus in children, because hopefully they're going to get a toolkit almost from a young age that they can then hopefully use as they grow and develop. And as adults, if we can tap into ourselves from what you're saying and see where we need that development as individuals and think those things that would work for us, it's just going to be hugely beneficial in thinking about that resilience. And I think it was lovely to hear that you were an advocate for all of those different things. There shouldn't be a stigma around it. If somebody's feeling overwhelmed and they need that help, they need to know where to get it. And I think that's...
Yeah. And I often think it can have a really positive kind of ripple effect on other people and other things in your life. So, if you take a first step and normalize talking about your feelings to a colleague, it may well be that they're in a similar position. So what you've just done is kind of unlocked a little bit of a stigma for them, and normalized accessing some help. So that could be a real positive benefit. But I also find in counselling that taking action can have this kind of a chain reaction for taking control of other areas of our life as well. So by prioritizing yourself for 1 hour a week and tapping into, who am I, what do I need right now, you can start to think about how can I replicate this feeling in other elements of my life. and it might be about relationships, and that can happen in the workplace as well. So you may find that you're not very good at having boundaries in the workplace. You might be a yes person, people pleaser, you know, and through counselling or other kind of just self-awareness exercises, you might kind of start to understand that about yourself and realise that saying yes all of the time is adding to a lot of the stress that you're having to deal with in the workplace. And it could be parents as well, when we deal with parents of children. So yeah, that can be a really big thing to work on, and that can really improve our mental health once we understand how and when to put in boundaries in place.
So it's that real self-reflection that's going to be, I suppose, integral in looking at what you need as an individual, because we look at what the children need and we observe them, we look at their behaviour patterns, but actually for it to work for us, we need to almost observe in ourselves what we're feeling and what's happening. It's really interesting, really interesting. Oh, Sarah, well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's definitely given me lots of food for thought. Really appreciate it. Was there anything else you wanted to mention before we sign off today?
Yeah, I just listening to you talk about what the children need, it just made me realise that there are so many synergies with what we need as well. And when you mentioned your analogy about going into Tesco's, and I just thought, well, that's exactly right. That we're comforted by familiarity, aren't we? And routine and all of those things. It probably doesn't change. And we work so hard to put that in place for children, routine, predictable situations, comfort, familiarity. But we need that too as adults. And, there are lots of things that we can do to put that into place for ourselves. So yeah, let's not forget ourselves along the way, I guess.
A lovely point. I think we'll be much better role models, much better. Hopefully, if we can sort of have that recognition of ourselves and be kind to ourselves, be kind to others. I think that's what I've got from this today as well. How many people
Yeah,
never know what's
absolutely.
going on.
Yeah, and I think that exactly the same way that we reward children and recognize their progress, let's apply that to ourselves as well, right? Because we're all doing the very best that we can. And yeah, recognizing those small wins are really important as well.
Absolutely. I think being your own cheerleader is a great way to try and develop that strength. Absolutely. Oh, it's been really insightful, Sarah, and it's definitely given me food for thought, even for myself, if I'm completely honest. It's been really interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time out today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks so much, Emma.
Thank you so much.
Wow, what a great discussion with Sarah Patterson. I think we can all relate to the points she made about self-care and resilience, especially in our profession. Emma, Nick, what in particular stood out for you?
For me, one of the things that really stood out is that resilience is something we can actually learn. I found that concept really interesting. It's not something that we're born with. It's something we can learn to demonstrate in our everyday lives.
Yeah, good point, Nick. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I was thinking for me, the bit that stood out most was how connected everything can be. Your physical health, your mental well-being, stress, your relationships with other people. I think Sarah managed to do that full walk around everything that impinges on your work-life balance and how you feel about who you are and what you do, because I think she described resilience as that bounce back, the skill of bouncing back from anything. So I just like the way that she connected so many different things together. I thought it was really, really good.
Yeah, and then that points about things like setting boundaries, managing burnout. As you say, you've got to make sure that you are bouncing back from something, because ultimately, if you're just kind of if you're giving, pouring things out, you kind of need to kind of refill at some point. Any thoughts about boundaries and burnout?
I think it's a really interesting concept, particularly when you're working with other professionals managing you and you're on a tight sort of time frame for things, I think it can magnify. I think one of the things that I did actually personally from talking with Sarah was actually having a look at my week and looking at what maybe I could change to more the beginning of the week rather than to the end of the week, so that the end of the week wasn't such that kind of painful, got to get everything done, got to get everything tied up, because it's a fresh week for next week. So I think that was something that I really took away from that.
And I think from thinking about conversations I've had with colleagues in different settings, being clear about roles and responsibilities, knowing when to say no, or having the voice to be able to say, I feel like I'm running to the end of my resources here. It's all very well to be resilient and to bounce back, but a lot of what I took from Sarah was about being preemptive and trying to plan not to have to bounce back, if you see what I mean. So I think having conversations with others, she talked a lot, didn't she, about finding your voice and finding someone to talk to, whether it's within the organisation or outside. I think just being able to be clear about what's causing you stress and what's been difficult, and try to avoid burnout, but it's about having the confidence to speak up sometimes. And I think Sarah made those points really clearly.
And I think that anybody struggling as well, it was really nice to hear that it kind of broke down that stigma of, anybody can benefit from having a conversation with somebody. You're right, Nick, anybody can benefit from that little intervention, an hour a week, just having a chat. Can really help, as well as if you're really struggling, it's okay to get that additional help that you might need. So I think like just bringing it to light that we go through periods of life which are very difficult, and we might need some extra support, was really helpful to kind of make you think about and reflect on yourself as an individual and what you might need.
Yeah, and that concept then of kind of demonstrating that self, showing that you are managing that you might have vulnerabilities, that these things are affecting you if it's an aspiring leader or a leader in a strategic or management role at the moment, and how might from either one of you, perhaps Nick, how do you think then that would sort of present itself then in a way that's positive, that supports colleagues, promotes team well-being within, and perhaps supports a positive culture within the organisation then?
Yeah, I found, I think it was early on when Sarah said something about modelling resilience. That's really stuck with me, because you're absolutely right, whether you're in a leadership position or whether you're just staff member, or even when you're working with children, it really struck me that the way that she said to model that bounce back, to model that how you deal with it. Even with kids, you could say, oh, well, that kind of stuff happens. Rather than somebody say, why is it always me, or why has that happened to me? Being quite overt and quite upfront about, this has happened and this is how I'm going to deal with it. That really struck me, that modeling and setting that tone and creating that culture of, yes, stuff happens. That's life. That's what happens. Much as you want to avoid it, much as you'd love to plan around it, stuff does happen. And it's about being able to show how you bounce back and make that quite clear that I've had this setback and this is what I'm going to do to try to recover from it. Actually, I think, as Emma was saying, it actually gives people the opportunity to voice their own response and say, oh, I'm so glad you said that, because that's how I feel. So the idea of modelling resilience, I found really, really helpful.
Yeah, there we go. And well done then, Nick, for saying stuff happens. I'm sure you could have chosen much more florid language there, but thank you for the pointing out that stuff can happen. Emma, over to you. Have you got any ideas, really, any kind of suggestions, practices or routines that you've perhaps used within teams that help alleviate stress or promote well-being?
I think, first of all, communicating is really important. I think obviously there is that level of professionalism that we need to keep. And yeah, we do, often when we're working with young people and we're working with colleagues, it is a profession. So sometimes there's things going on at home that are quite stressful. But it is also, I think it was really good what Nick just mentioned, because everybody has their stuff. Not one of us is everything dandy for. We don't, it just doesn't work like that. So actually working together, acknowledging, somebody's having a bit of a bad time at the moment, is there anything extra we can do to support them? It just creates that culture of we're all together. And, you know, yes, we get things wrong because we're not perfect. You know, not everything goes according to plan. So seeing how other people, particularly in that management and leadership role, deal with that and show those flaws, I think that is also important, because often we look and go, well, they do everything so amazing, they get it right every time. But actually showing it in a professional way, well, actually, guys, together as a team, this didn't go how we wanted it to. And, you know, establishing, you know, those abilities to bounce back and be resilient together, I think is really important.
And don't forget, Emma, that, you know, children will observe those that work around them, and they will see and kind of take note of how stuff happens and what people do and how they react to things, even with a stressful setting. You know, it could be a noisy classroom or a room that's gone a bit chaotic. Children are learning all the time, and they're absorbing what they see and what they sense from others. So I think everything you just said there also applies at setting level as well as between staff members. So it's really fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. For the children, see us getting things wrong and going, oh, I've made a silly mistake. I think it's just, yeah, it is really important. You're right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you get into those leadership roles and people will look at you almost, I'm not saying it's compared to parenting, carer, guardian responsibilities specifically, but they're looking to you for guidance. They're looking to you to know the answers, and that sort of mindset that, oh, maybe I should know the answers. I know myself, certainly, I felt that I was supposed to know answers to questions that there was no way that I could be reasonably expected to know the answers to, but being prepared then to admit that and saying, well, I don't know that, and that's perhaps causing me some stress or some well-being issues because I'm now becoming anxious that I should know, I should have all of these answers available immediately purely because I've been appointed as a leader. And you talked there about sort of perhaps the way we sort of normalise discussing and sharing any issues around resilience and well-being. To either of you, perhaps if I come to you first, Emma, you know, how would you encourage colleagues and the children within the settings to speak up when they need help?
I think it's generally a thing that you want to bring into your everyday culture to make everybody feel that they've got a voice, both staff and children. And I think just, you know, obviously with children, it's observing their behaviour. And sometimes it may not be something they can vocalise, but there's something going on. So just being mindful of that and giving them the opportunity to talk. And I think, you know, when you're looking at a managing and leadership position, it's talking to your staff, having those regular reviews with them, you know, giving them the opportunity to say what's bothering them, having that open door policy if something's bothering them, I think is really important to get everybody on board and sharing.
Yeah, I agree with that, Emma. And I think to build on what you said in terms of developing those relationships, I'm very mindful of a few people I've worked with who they kind of needed the start of the sentence of the way to say I'm struggling, and they kind of wanted permission. They knew they could, but they didn't quite have the words. And there's something here about having the culture, and as you say, Emma, the opportunities, whether it's because there's staff meetings and there's break times, but looking for every opportunity to allow people to say what they are finding difficult, and almost for some people saying it's okay to say I'm struggling. It's not as if I'll look down on you, or that, you know, you're going to risk your career prospects, or that will affect your contract in any way. I think having that openness and even finding words and vocabulary, just as I say, sentence starters. I really want to talk to you about. Some people will need permission and some words to use, because for some staff members, those words don't come easily. So I think you've almost got to reach out and find ways of, as you say, opening that door.
Yeah, and Sarah pointed out the importance of seeking help early, seeking support early. And I agree, Nick, yes, that making every possible effort that you can to ensure that somebody at that moment when they're reaching out and they're seeking support, if they feel in some way that door is closing, or that kind of closed door policy, if they feel that, then perhaps that would be enough to stop them coming forward at all. It's that very, very crucial early part. Yeah, lovely. Thanks, both. Any other kind of final comments then before we draw today's podcast to a close?
So I've just been toying with it because I love a good analogy. I love like an image in my mind. And when I was a bit younger, I tried to play squash. I thought it'd be a great game to play, and I was terrible at it. But throughout what Sarah was saying, it kept coming back to me that a squash ball, talking about bouncing back. I mean, boy, oh boy, you hit a squash ball, like you properly bat it hard, don't you? And then it whacks against a wall, then it's bounced back. And as soon as it bounced back, some other idiot smashes it again. And I'm trying to think, to be a squash ball, rubbery, bounce back, doesn't matter how many times you wallop it, it always comes back for more. And I just feel that that ability to give and to take a blow and to bounce back and to keep going, I think there's something in that for me. I want to sort of spend a bit more time on that rubbery, pliable, bouncing back, kind of irrepressible. You're not going to stop me from, you're not going to get me down. You can whack me as hard as you want. I'm going to keep coming back. A bit like that pepperoni advert that it always makes me smile. And how many bits you bite off, he still jumps up for more. So there's something positive about resilience. It's not just like I've been knocked down, I've got to get back up again. You can you can almost like celebrate and find a joy in bouncing back from however hard you've been whacked. So yeah, that's in it for me. I really want to sort of spend a bit more time thinking about that.
Yeah, kind of a practical thing to kind of keep in mind there. I think perhaps our music at the end of today's session should be the track Rubber Ball. For those of a certain age, they'll remember the song Rubber Ball. I keep come bouncing back all the time. People can put in the comments and say who the artist was. That's something for people to kind of go and look at.
I'll definitely have to Google that one. Thanks, Anne.
Yeah, so yeah, I certainly don't have to. I can be the artist. Yeah, so and Emma, any kind of thoughts or tips from yourself?
Yeah, just following on from what Nick said, which was really interesting. I really like that way of looking at resilience as a positive thing, in the sense of it's not that, oh my gosh, something's gone so wrong, oh, I've got to bounce back from it, but seeing it as a real opportunity to grow and develop. I mean, for me, I think as an individual, one of the things I've noticed from having that discussion with Sarah is actually just taking 5 minutes. So when I'm struggling with something, taking 5 minutes, having a cup of tea, yes, I can then kind of reflect on it, think about how I'm going to bounce back, and then I'm back at it. And I think that's really helped me, just taking that 5 minutes in between. So I might be a longer bounce back on your squash game, Nick, but I think just the idea of getting myself ready to propel back is just as important for me.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I find similar actually in taking breaks. I wear a smartwatch, and yes, depending, we might name the watch in future episodes, but at the moment I'm saying smartwatch for now. Yeah, I get that it does tap me. I found it at the start quite intrusive, I must be honest, because I found that it was breaking my kind of train of thought, and it would sort of tap me and say, take a moment to breathe or take a time for mindfulness. And, having listened to various podcasts and discussions and read around, I thought, actually, I need to take this seriously. I really need to consider it, because I found myself sitting for extended periods of time. And now that's something I do. I actively encourage people to put those on, and when it taps you, it's there to try and remind you and think, if you can, to take that break and actually take that moment out. And I was finding that literally I set it for 30 seconds, a minute, or 3 minutes, and that is actually sufficient. I do feel genuinely recharged and refreshed and refocused when I come back. I've surprised myself that such a short period of time of kind of closing my eyes or changing the seating position can have such a big impact. It's surprising, isn't it? Every bit counts. Just some 5 key takeaways perhaps then from today's episode. We're thinking of modelling resilience, showing children and your staff members how to navigate challenges. Basically, it's okay to make mistakes. It's all about how we bounce back. We're going to use that now. Prioritise self-care, whether that's through sleep, proper nutrition, small breaks, as we've talked about, taking care of your physical health to build resilience and support your emotional health. Setting boundaries. Don't be afraid to say no and protect your time and energy. Practice mindfulness. Find moments throughout the day to pause, breathe, and reset. And then seeking support. Don't hesitate to talk to a colleague, potentially a counsellor or other expert professionals, or friends when things get tough. And with that, we come to the end of today's podcast. I hope you found our discussion on wellbeing and resilience helpful and thought-provoking. And of course, a big thank you to Sarah Patterson for sharing her insights with us today.
Thanks, Anne. It's been great chatting today, and I hope everyone listening takes away something useful from today.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. And please take care of yourselves. Remember, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. Look out for our next podcast, and until next time, take care.